to a morose trumpet, we receive a card informing us of who Robert Gould Shaw was and how we know about his life during the Civil War. From there, as drums begin to beat, the film is named and we open with an angelic choir over a fresh, misty dawn at the Union Army camp. First, the camp is still, and as it awakes, we're greeted to quiet and peaceable scenes of everyday military life. Some are milling about their duties, others are at leisure, smoking, chatting, cooking breakfast, and receiving their mail. It's all, let's be honest, pretty stereotypical, maybe even a little hokey. But it is soon overtaken with scenes of greater action, a cut to cavalrymen racing along a road while the infantry wheel into column. Then a flash to men marching, colors flying, arms at their side, their uniforms clean and glittering. And it's then that we first hear from one of Shaw's famous letters.
Dear Mother, I hope you are keeping well and not worrying too much about me. You mustn't think that any of us are going to be killed, for they are collecting such a force here that an attack would be insane.
Having a letter home being read over your introduction like this, it's a pretty standard trope in war movies. Again, if you want to be cynical, you can even say it's a little hokey. And if that was the whole intro, well, I'd be inclined to agree. But when you take the introduction as a whole, I think it works really quite well, and I'll explain why that is through the course of this video. For now, the letter tells us a number of key elements of Shaw's personality, particularly when he quotes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, but it also tells us about the war itself and why the war is being waged. He says he's proud to be fighting in such a grand effort, which has brought so many men together to preserve the Union. But it's also fascinating, I think, how that preservation is then blended with another cause, that of emancipation.
The Massachusetts men passed through here this morning. How grand it is to meet the men from all the states, east and west, down here ready to fight for their country, as the old fellows did in the Revolution. But this time, we must make it a whole country, for all who live here, so that all can speak.
That a part of making the Union whole is to actually be making it whole for everyone within it. Not to harp on it all too greatly, but I think this is a really interesting and valuable idea, that we need to dispense with this separation of the two concepts. Either you're preserving the Union in like the most strict legalistic sense, or you're freeing the slaves and debating which one of those was the true cause of the Civil War from the North's perspective. And I think that we need to appreciate that for a lot of the people who were on the ground back in the day, those causes were very much one and the same. But before I start rambling on too much, we can return to the clip. That's a whole other subject. Let's get back to the movie for now.
Before this war began, many of my regiment had never seen a Negro.
As Shaw describes the need for abolition, we see a tragic scene as the column of troops passes by some refugees. The music swells beautifully as Shaw explains the strength of his feeling for the abolitionist cause.
We fight for men and women whose poetry is not yet written, but which will presently be as enviable and as renowned as any.
Now, as effective as this scene is in explaining the context of the Civil War and helping the viewer to feel why that context matters, there is one line there that gave me a little bit of pause and made me wonder if it wasn't being just a tad too melodramatic, maybe even something thrown in by the script writers to help accentuate an original point to Shaw, but that he didn't actually write himself. And that line was...
Before this war began, many of my regiment had never seen a Negro.
I mean, come on, that's a little intense, don't we think? It made me feel like maybe they were just throwing it in there to help the viewer understand that most of the Union soldiers weren't, like, really fighting for abolition above all else, but, you know, for many of them it was just one concern out of a great deal, and, you know, it's not like they're giving abolition, like, as much mind as maybe, you know, Robert Gould Shaw, who was involved in the abolition movement, not as much mind as he might be. So, you know, it made me think about that, and I wanted to confirm, right? So what I did was, well, I pulled up the 1860 census data for Massachusetts, and, well, Huh. Turns out, the population of Massachusetts in 1860 was a little over 1.2 million. Of that population, the total number of free-colored, that's as it was written back in the day, we don't talk like that anymore, but there were only 9,602. That's a smidge less than 0.8% of the total population. The census also included data on specific towns, and from that we can see, as you might expect, that the majority of that population was concentrated in larger settlements, and sometimes even within singular districts within those settlements. Boston, for example, had a little over 2,000 black residents, over half of whom were all in a single ward out of 12. And what's even more indicative of this, I think, is the number of towns and communities where you can see there being less than a dozen, half dozen, even just 1 or 2 black residents in the entire area, while quite a few of them had none whatsoever. So combining that with the fact that, a lot of these guys before the war, it's not like they would have been traveling very often if they're, a farmer in a small backwoods town or something, well, it's actually very possible then that a large portion of these soldiers would never have even seen a black person, let alone have any kind of relationship with them, be positive or negative, right? Either way, before they entered the war and actually started traveling across the country. And altogether, I think, from our modern perspective, that's a really interesting concept. And you can imagine how significantly that fact would bear on the way in which these individuals, whatever their thoughts on abolition, would have been thinking about these questions of slavery and race relations and the like, when there's so little, day-to-day involvement with, the core issue that's being discussed. So, at the end of the day, not only was that simple little, throwaway-ish line, not only was it effective at informing the viewer, myself in this case, on a complicated, nuanced historical issue, but it even inspired an interest within me to go out and do my own research, which is exactly what historical media ought to be aiming to do. And at the end of the day, of course, when I did that own research, I realized that the movie was right. So, well done, Glory. Very well done. The letter continues, giving us some added context about the state of the war and Shaw's role within it, and is particularly helpful for those who might not be so familiar with military terminology like captains and companies and the like.
I am honored to be part of such a splendid company. They have made me captain, of which I am enormously proud. You would think it strange to see me giving orders to 100 men, most of whom are older than I am.
We also learn a little bit more about Shaw's personality as he thanks his mother for sending him a book, although I do have to say that the flash to his mother reading the letter, it strikes me as a little over the top. Finally, the letter ends on an emotional note. We see the army moving out with the dawn to yet more heroic music, and even the clamoring of bells to help build up the intensity. It's all just so hopeful and dramatic, and of course, glorious. Both of the armies form up in their orderly rows, as if we were about to witness a bit of sport, rather than a battle. Now, if the scene that immediately followed all this was Shaw being woken up by a reveille call, or standing before a mirror getting fitted for his suit, which is also two very common tropes in military films, well, it would be a wholly unremarkable introduction. Again, normally the reading a letter back home trope is overplayed, and it can very easily represent like one of the laziest kinds of just raw exposition. But that isn't the case here. Instead, I believe that this opening letter sequence is a genius move by the film's creators, which only becomes apparent how genius it is with what comes next. Our music is cut short suddenly with the blast of a cannon, the bells replaced with rolling drums and booming guns, joined soon with rattling musketry and screaming men. Debris is falling from overhead as Shaw urges his men onwards through the din, the sun being blotted out by gunsmoke. Men are falling in every direction, and while admittedly some of them are being thrown in rather exaggerated fashion, as was endemic to these older war films, the use of rapid cuts and the loud noises helps to disorient the audience, helping us to feel the chaos that these men were experiencing. Rather than the wide sweeping shots and a soundtrack that tells us precisely what to feel at every single moment, the emphasis here is on not allowing the viewer to ever become too comfortable with any one sight, or to have a real complete idea of what's really going on in any one place. Something I really appreciate with this battle sequence is how, while there are clearly a large number of extras present, the film makes very good use of the numbers that they have by, first of all, never allowing us to see the end of them. As in, you very rarely get any shots within this entire sequence that isn't filled entirely from left to right with soldiers or guns or something else to look at. So that rather than, having us look at 50 men and sort of making us imagine that they actually represent the entire Union Army, well, instead, we see those 50 men in a line, and we can imagine how the line keeps on going beyond the screen, beyond what we are able to see. Those more narrow shots as well, they not only allow us to appreciate the chaos of the moment more, it helps to condense the scene, and it adds a greater depth to the field because, with those limited extras and limited props and everything you have, you're able to fill in the screen with a lot more activity, a much denser level of activity. Likewise, the use of smoke and falling debris and the like helps to make again, what is a limited, film production feel a lot more like the proper scale of a battle, which realistically is almost impossible to really capture. Another film that did this exceptionally well was the 1964 Culloden by Peter Watkins, which to an even greater degree emphasized those really close-up shots, those narrow perspectives, and excellent sound design without any sort of hokey soundtracks to make what was, ultimately that film had like a handful of extras and a single cannon. They used those little movie tricks of movie magic to create what looked and felt like a battle of cataclysmic scale. Now, of course, I have a few videos about that film as well from way back in the day. If you are so interested, I will link them down below. But likewise here, the lack of a soundtrack is also something that I absolutely love. Again, unlike certain other films, we don't have to have some over-the-top orchestra telling us how we're meant to be feeling about everything that we see, or even, guiding us along with the overall progression of the battle. Instead, we're just forced to sit and endure the pure reality of the situation. It's an excellent way, I think, that the film is demonstrating the horrors of war without having to hit us over the head with them. As the horror of the battle builds up, much like the cannon shot of before, we witness another pointed shift in the scene's direction with this poor fellow.
For God's sake, come on!
Not only are we escalating the visceral element of the scene with that shot, it also brings us into the beginning of the end. The shots are becoming more rapid, more intense, as our screen is filled with men getting hit and our ears are filled with explosions. As Shaw struggles to maintain control over his men, urging them on while others call to retreat, he seems to be suffering from a panic attack when he too falls and realizes he's been wounded. There's a visual shift here as well, where the film goes from almost always having the Confederates on the left and the Union on the right, to suddenly showing Union men facing in every which way, from every which direction, as one after the other is getting hit in rapid succession. It's a fantastic visual way to, again, keep those tight angles while demonstrating perfectly the chaos and the confusion that's happening within the line as it breaks down. And this is all, well before we hear the sound of the bugle calling retreat. And there's no soundtrack telling us, oh, the battle's going poorly. It doesn't tell us that the battle is going poorly. It is actively showing us. It's demonstrating to us the horror that these people are experiencing. Ultimately, as retreat is sounded and the colors wave in flight, we see men dying in droves, while another cries over the madness for his mother to help him. It's heartrending. It's terrifying. It is the precise opposite of the angelic choir of glory that we heard just moments before, of the enthusiastic letters back home, and of the poetry of building a new nation. Now we open to a corpse before a cannon, and a field of bodies while laborers pick their way through the mess to clean it all up. Here there are no melodramatic speeches, no morose violins, not even a bit of reverence. It's just piles of corpses and the pained labor which they represent. Shaw, being found amongst them, is nudged awake.
You all right there, Cam?
So again, this is a classic scene and not a little bit stereotypical, but I think it is done well here, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. You know, I like how there isn't some over-the-top emotional moment where Shaw is discovered and people rush to his aid and, you know, and there's some speech or whatever. You know, instead, he's just sort of nudged by a laborer who, you know, afterwards is like, "You all right, Cap? All right, cool." And he goes back to his job. He's got his own business to take care of. He's not there to help this random captain. I mean, he looks fine. Got a little neck injury. He's all right. Go back to what, you know, your day job, basically. This scene doesn't have any grand pontificating. There's no speeches. There's no swelling music or anything. Just very matter of fact, very down to earth. Now, I can't say that I'm a particular fan of how the sun was blotting out the guy's face at first, because that in particular does strike me as a little bit more, you know, over-the-top melodramatic. It's not quite speech levels, but, you know, it's like when the grand reveal is like, whoa, it's a black guy. It's like, I feel like that kind of detracts from the moment a little bit. Again, I would much rather have it be a very nonchalant, down-to-earth, nothing special shown in this terrible yet mundane kind of moment. But, you know, overall, if that is a sin, if it's maybe like a little heavy-handed on the whole, like, you know, that's the reason why Shaw is fighting to liberate, you know, Black Americans and all that. Like, if it's a little heavy-handed, if it is a sin of the film, I think it's a pretty slight one. And to be fair as well, I'm sure that there are plenty of other possible interpretations of that particular shot. It was very purposely done, of course. I just haven't maybe picked up on them. But we can move on for now. Rising to his feet, a shaken Shaw gazes across the smoky field surrounding, witnessing broken bodies and broken minds limping amongst the corpses as the choir finally returns to us. This time it isn't a soundtrack of glory and triumph, but of remorse and sorrow. Behind him we hear a wounded horse being put down, and as Shaw crests the hill, we see that the terror isn't over, but more men still carry on the struggle, fighting and dying and being mutilated by dueling artillery and flying rockets. Battle, in this way, cares not for the bloody swaths it carves, but forges ever on in its terror. Shaw, as he again feels the pain of his wound, struggles to comprehend it all. So admittedly, it really doesn't make a lot of sense how we had almost perfect silence up to that moment, and then he just stumbles across the battle. I mean, you know, realistically, if it's being waged, like, the sound of those guns should be heard for miles around, right? To say nothing of the screaming and the drumming and all the rest. I see the function that silence is serving narratively, but it does remove me a little bit from having the moment feel believable right when it's meant to be at its most impactful. I think that if we're going to justify it at all, it would be something along the lines of saying that the entire scene is being done from Shaw's perspective, and because of the shock of everything, maybe he just genuinely wasn't paying any mind to the sounds of the raging battle just beyond, and then it only sort of hit him and he noticed it again when he was there, witnessing it himself. That's when the true horror of the situation is setting in. But again, overall, I'd say that if this is like the worst sin of the film's introduction, and again, compared with like some of the other stuff out there, it's not really that bad. And at least it is contributing to what is otherwise still a beautiful and deeply impactful moment. And again, it's one that's serving a very clear narrative function for Shaw's character as he struggles with the trauma of that moment for the rest of the film. Now, to the screams of the wounded and the prayers of the dying, we come to the Army hospital. Yet another classic scene in practically every war film, but again, executed brilliantly and with far deeper meaning than just showing the material reality of this particularly bloody part of military history, although it does do that still very well. In particular, we have an extraordinary dichotomy as a nonchalant orderly is sewing up Shaw's minor wound, while in the background we hear a man having his leg amputated, and he's evidently feeling every tooth of that bone saw while the blood splatters onto the curtain. The fact that we only get these little glimpses, we get shadows and silhouettes, forces the viewer to imagine the unimaginable taking place behind that little curtain, just as Shaw is being forced to do as he witnesses a fate that he only so narrowly avoided. And meanwhile, through all of that, there's the orderly just casually chattering away and apologizing to the captain that his needle might hurt a little bit, while just opposite a man is pleading for his surgeon to just stop cutting.
He says Lincoln's gonna issue an emancipation proclamation. Gonna free the slaves.
What?
Well, maybe not the ones in the border states or something, I don't know, but he's gonna free some of them anyway.
My God.
Yeah, said he would have done it sooner, only he was waiting on a big victory. Which is, I guess, what this is.
Oh my God! Please don't cut anymore, please!
Am I hurting you, Captain? I'm sorry.
And what is he chatting about? Well, it's emancipation. He connects us at this horrific and dirty and nauseating moment with the heroic, with the idealistic, the glorious, romantic cause of the war itself. What a beautiful and thought-provoking contrast that is. The necessity of the war's aims laid right alongside the necessary effects of waging it. And that brings us to the end of our first, 9 and some odd minutes of the film Glory. As I've said, the basic structure of this introduction, it's not exactly inspired. You might even describe it as pretty formulaic. But the execution of it, I think, is exceptionally beautifully well done. For even despite leaning on the classic letter home opening, it doesn't just exposit to us about the setting, but it demonstrates in visceral and emotionally impactful detail the nature of the world that we are being thrown into. It helps us as viewers to not merely understand what is happening, but to relate with and better understand on its own terms a deeply difficult and nuanced time in American history. Unlike certain other war films, and especially Civil War films, it doesn't seek to glorify or aggrandize any historical figures, not even the Union troops, but rather it addresses the causes of the Civil War and what made it necessary, the idealism behind the war, as we see in the letter, while simultaneously it refuses to lighten the blow of what the war actually looked like, of the pain, of the trauma, as in the battle sequence, before then at last seamlessly blending those two elements together in the hospital scene. And in so doing, I believe that the film forces us to re-examine our pre-existing conceptualizations of historical warfare, of its causes and of its means, and how they interact. In short, it makes us question the meaning of glory. My name is Brandon Fischella, and on behalf of the Native Oak, thank you for watching. And until the next time, my dear viewer, I am and I shall remain your most humble and obedient of servants. Of course, as fantastic as this scene is, it was not a pure invention of the filmmakers. It was intended to reflect a very real historical event from the perspective of a very real man. So as authentic and well shot as this all was, how historically accurate was it? Well, to answer that, we're going to need to look at the sources and the original letters of Robert Gould Shaw himself. And if you're interested in that, well, you might consider becoming a supporter of the Native Oak via Patreon, because the next video, Horrors Inseparable, the Battle of Antietam, is going to be available for early release there as soon as it's ready. Otherwise, just make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and hit the bell icon, of course. That way you'll get notified as soon as it's released to the public later this month. I'm trying to hit 250,000 subscribers before my 30th birthday, so help me get there by sharing this video, liking it, commenting, and of course, be sure to visit nativeoak.org to learn more. Thank you all.